welcome to the Riverfront Reds Show, where we will spend the next hour talking about Elder St. X at PBS/Paycor Stadium. Oh, wait, no, we won't. This is a Cincinnati Reds show, and we're so thankful for everyone for tuning in. Along with Late Night Reds host Skylar Wuebker, I am Seth Shaner. Skylar, thanks for joining me again.
Yeah, no worries. Anytime.
So the news fairy was not very kind to us throughout the week, and I was like, well, we got to have a show, and we're going to have a show. I don't have the excuse that maybe with Thanksgiving next week I won't have a show. So here we are. We had to have a show, and yet Nick Krall, and every time Nick Krall opens his mouth, there is something to talk about, and that's not usually the greatest compliment. But Nick Krall went on the Reds Hot Stove League last night, the Hot Stove Show, and he said some things. So let's just dive right in. Fair warning to everyone out there, I've got Skylar for a limited engagement here because he's a man of the people and has things he's got to do. So if he disappears on us, we'll go on without him. But Skylar, you're here for now. So first off, we're going to talk about this. Nick Krall confirmed, which I guess is the first time that's happened, although Freddie Benavides, I thought, kind of said this already during the season. Charlie Goldsmith reported it on his podcast. Nick Krall confirmed that he had a partially torn quad, that is Elly De La Cruz, about half of the season. So the first question is, didn't we already kind of know that?
I don't know if we knew it in the sense of torn. We thought maybe tweaks, maybe some something. But it feels weird that we're talking about it now versus somebody in that organization being a grown-up and saying, hey, Elly, take a few days, take a week off,
Sure.
like protecting this player versus running him out there every day. Because if you ask him, he's going to say yes. He's going to say, I want to play every day. That's every ball player. Well, you'd hope every ball player.
Well, that's the key point right there, though, because Reds Nation, Reds fans across the tri-state, across wherever you are, if you're a Reds fan, we have a history of dogging players for taking too much time off. There's another guy we're going to talk about in a minute who some things were sparked during the season and after the season. So if I was to play devil's advocate, I'll go with two things. And actually, Mo Egger said last night that there was actually a bit of a retraction by Krall, and this is the retraction. If you have a partial tear, like literally the definition of a strain of any kind of muscle or soft tissue injury, a strain by definition is a partial tear. And so that's getting into semantics a little bit, but a partial tear is a strain. So if somebody said, oh, I strained something, but I can still play. Well, you're dealing with something. You're nursing an injury and you're continuing to play. I'm with you. The numbers spoke for themselves. I mean, he went, how many at bats? 300 and some at bats with only one home run. We knew. And remember, I think I'm the one that said, hey, remember Joey Votto 2012? He had a quad injury. Now it required surgery. But when he came back the rest of 2012, the man was on pace for 70-some doubles. And he comes back. I think he only played like 111 games that year. But he comes back, and throughout the rest of the season and into the postseason, he was a singles hitter. But playoff push, we got to go. We got to see what you can do out there. It just adds up to me. All of it adds up. I'm not even – I guess as an Ohio State fan, I've been really dwelling on this thing since COVID, basically, that the Ohio State football program doesn't report anything when it comes to injuries, nothing. And I think it was to the detriment of some certain players. Now there's a guy named Travion Henderson who's a huge symbol of everything they did last year for the national championship. Before last year, Travion Henderson was just known as, hey, we went into the game this week, and as a fan base, we thought everybody's healthy, we're good to go. And, oh, wait a minute, Travion's not playing. Because they didn't tell you he wasn't going to play. And they didn't tell you he's got this injury. Jackson Smith and Jig was last year. game 1 he gets hurt. And all season, it's like, could he play this week? Could he play this week? Because they never released a thing about his injury. And so it's not that surprising that they kind of hid, exactly what it was. But again, I think Freddie Benavides let it slip at one point in a media session. I think Tito kind of went to the edge of saying what it was a few times. And, it was obvious to watch him play. This is the fastest man in baseball, and he wasn't that fast. And
Yeah,
this was
and
a guy with light tower power, and he didn't have any.
and I would meet that with this is your franchise. This is the guy that to build your franchise around. Why aren't you doing everything possible to put him in a good position? Whether it's, hey, take a couple weeks off, get right. Like, why are you trotting him out there to put him in a bad position to look silly? Where because he couldn't steal bags and because he couldn't do the light tower power, like that's just a detriment to the Reds to put Elly in a position like that. Knowing that he is right now, he is your franchise player and should be your franchise player, and not putting him in a position to succeed or putting him in the position best for himself feels like slimy.
Yeah, I guess so. There's another thing here too. Like if you have an injury that can't get worse, if that was the case, and I'm going to use Aaron Rodgers here. Aaron Rodgers has a small fracture in his left arm, non-throwing arm. Aaron Rodgers missed the second half basically against the Bengals. Didn't matter. Actually, Mason Rudolph was better than Aaron Rodgers in that game. It was awful. But Aaron Rodgers wants to play this week and against the Bears. And if doctors say you won't make it any worse, it's just about your pain tolerance, and it's not his throwing arm, obviously, then okay, Aaron Rodgers, go ahead and play. But I have a hard time thinking if you have a partial tear in your quad, which is a strain again.
Mm-hmm.
I have a hard time thinking that you couldn't get that worse. Now, a doctor might tell you, even if you make it a little worse, your rehab's going to be the same in the offseason. So I guess I can see from Elly's point of view, as you said, a guy who wants to play every day. But you're right. There were grown-ups in the room. And I guess the only question is if a doctor told me, hey, Elly needed to take 2 full months off to get well, to get back, if he wanted to see any improvement. And honestly, if aside from the mental strain of like playing every day, which is very difficult in baseball, because that's why we honor a guy like Cal Ripken, right, for continuing to play every day. Aside from the mental strain of playing every day with an injury, what would it have benefited him to take a day off? So I think that's where I get to. He should have taken a day or 2 or 3 off here or there just to get right, like emotionally and mentally, to kind of refocus and things like that. But if he couldn't really get better physically, then on that end of it, I'm not really that critical, I guess. And I'm in the vast minority because I've seen it all over. But it is what it is at that point. But you're right. Adults in the room should have prevailed. But I've heard people say he should have shut it down for the rest of the season. So I guess
I think that might be egregious, but in the sense of even if you said, all right, we'll trot him out there, we'll see. You clearly saw the production take a huge hit. And at that point, it should have been obvious, hey, let's not make this guy suffer. Let's not go through all this just downswing basically. And figure something else out instead of just keep trotting them out there.
Sure. Yeah. But again, if the doctor said it's not getting better unless you just shut it down, like that's probably what the answer is to a quad. And so I don't know. And his errors obviously shot up. We thought he was looking better defensively before the All-Star break. It's right around that time that he heard it, allegedly. Although Nick Krall might retract that as well. Who knows? So I guess putting that to bed, I guess, what would you have done, Skylar? If the answer was either shut him down completely or just let him play as much as he wants, what would you have done?
If I would have shut him down.
You would have shut him down?
I mean, this team is riddled with shortstops. We have shortstops all over the diamond that are playing other positions. There's somebody that could come in and play shortstop.
Sure.
Granted, that it probably would have forced Nick Krall to do something more at the deadline, and maybe that's why he didn't,
Yeah, maybe.
because Elly was still playing. But
Okay.
for the betterment of a player and as just a human level, I would have shut him down.
Man, you went into witness protection there for a minute. Your camera
Yeah.
glazed over. That was pretty cool. All right. So another thing that Nick Krall addressed last night as we record this on Thursday, November 20th, Mark Sheldon continues to be in the middle of the Hunter Greene trade / should have come back sooner news. I've actually kicked around some ideas, Skylar, and I'm not going to come out with it completely as far as how to address the beat writer situation with your Cincinnati Reds and how to kind of talk about it with nuance and what should you expect. Like there's been times, and I'm just going to be honest, this is my opinion, okay? I live in Columbus, Ohio. I've lived here since college, since 1997. Right now and in the last 10 to 15 years, Columbus, Ohio is completely void of good sports talk radio hosts. And I'm sorry to anybody who is a host out there that might hear this or see this. It just is. There are other hosts around the country who I have tuned into that I've thought, man, if that guy would come to Columbus, I would just be amazed. Even there's no Lance McAllister or Mo Egger in Columbus. Like, and I no nothing against those guys, but there are guys around the country who are just, they're machines. They get people to jump on the bandwagon and kind of follow whatever season you are in sports and really dig in, and everybody has to listen. Beat writers aren't quite that way. They don't drive the needle or move the needle the way somebody on the radio can, because you're in your car, you got to listen to the radio, you got to listen to something. But there is a way to be a beat writer, and I just don't see it out of the Reds media in the past X amount of years. And I've thought about trying to figure this out. Now Mark Sheldon's been a Reds.com / MLB.com employee for many, many years. He covered the Twins. He's covered the Reds since what? Probably late 2000s. Like, it's been a long time.
As long as I can remember.
And I've never had a problem with Mark Sheldon, except for it's kind of like, well, you work for the company store. Like, that's kind of how I view anybody who writes for a .com that's employed by the league / team, right? I mean, there's no real getting around that. So it's amazing to me when Mark Sheldon writes back in July with his own voice, he says Greene needed to get back on the field since he has a long-term contract, and he says he wants to be a leader. And he said he had a clean MRI with his groin. Now, remember, this is the second time he was trying to come back from that same injury, and maybe he rushed it the first time.
Yeah.
I guess from that standpoint, if you read an article, normally as a writer, and I was a sports writer, and I'm still technically a sports writer, just not full time. As a writer writing articles that don't say commentary or opinion at the top, normally you don't say things that are like come across as this is what I think. You either attribute things to a known or unknown source, or you just put facts out there. And the way that read, I went back and read it last night. The way it read, it was basically Sheldon saying his own opinion. And maybe we've gotten there further and further in journalism, quote unquote, as we've gone along. So I've done it for years. What are your thoughts when you think of like a beat writer or a role of a guy like that around the team?
I think, like you said, it's very much you're a company man, company store idea. They're not going to write the negatives. They're not going to write like Assolini should sell the team. And it's very interesting that Mark Sheldon's taking this stance and taking it at an opinionated level and on a public opinionated level. I just don't get it. What does Mark Sheldon have to benefit from this?
Well, it says to me too, though, my first thought is you work for the team, basically. Somebody's feeding you this and they want you to say it. Because remember,
Right.
he said that in July, And then it didn't even seem like the team landed from LAX after losing to the Dodgers. And he's writing about how the Reds might trade Hunter Greene. And they might. That's not even. But somebody's feeding him this within the organization. That's all you can. That's all you can conclude. We saw Gordon Whitmire for the Inquirer write a piece back in mid to late April about how, well, if the fans start coming to games, maybe they'll make moves at the deadline. Do you think that was Gordon just saying it out of his own free will? Gordon was fed that information. All right. And that's fine. That's part of being a beat writer. You get told things and you decide what to do with it. I heard a guy one time talking about being a beat writer of a college football team, and he had like I forget what it was. It was a coach within the team saying this 4-string running back was really turning heads in practice, and he had to decide whether he wanted to write about this or not. And he ultimately chose not to. And then 3 weeks later, that running back, and other people did. Other people ran with the story and talked about him. 3 weeks later, the guy was at a different school. And it was almost as if they were trying to churn up interest to get their 4-string running back a spot on another team. Because they liked the kid, but they knew he wasn't going to play. And it was kind of like, let's push this narrative, right?
Right.
That's not egregious. That's fine. If a reporter wants to do that, they can do that. The same guy, I think, has talked before about how agents for coaches have gotten a hold of him and tried to give him leaks of information. And again, that's part of the business. But you have to look in the mirror and know if you're being used or not. And if you're okay with that, then that's fine. But that's what it comes down to. And we got a question later that includes old leather pants himself, Jim Bowden, in viewer mail. Jim Bowden had a direct line to Peter Gammons. Jim Bowden liked Peter Gammons to talk about the Reds on Baseball Tonight when that was a huge show in the industry and in around baseball. There would be in his Diamond Notes segment on Sports Center or on Baseball Tonight, there would be a Reds mention 90% of the time. And it was because Jim Bowden would call Peter Gammons and tell him things. That's okay. That's fine. It is what it is. So I guess this week Sheldon was in an Ask Me Anything Reddit. I'm not that familiar with those. I've used Reddit a little more recently than I used to, but so he goes on there, Ask Me Anything. And he was basically asked, why do you think you should insert yourself into, what the Reds should do with Hunter Greene or whether he should pitch or not? And, he stood his ground and he said it was sourced information from the team, which is what we've already said. But again, when you write it as it's your own opinion, that's when it gets a little like you wonder why is the team's beat writer not only a beat writer covering the team, the guy hired and employed by the league/team. It's just amazing to me that you would do that with your ace pitcher.
Well, and even just the way that it's phrased, everything about it is, oh, the Reds should look. That's telling me that it's not a decision maker giving him this information. It's not Nick Krall. It's not Castellini's or anybody that can actually do anything. And his source information could definitely just be like a disgruntled health rehab coach or just somebody in the organization that's disgruntled that Hunter Greene didn't rush his way back from this second groin injury. And it's just, it feels way too opinionated. It feels way too like, I don't know. It feels very clickbaity and opinionated because it's not, the Reds are looking to trade. The Reds are shopping. The Reds are listening to offers. It's, oh, the Reds should do it because Hunter Greene didn't come back from an injury as fast as he should have because of, and Nick Krall mentioned it on when he was on Hot Stove of, they asked him about the clean MRI and not coming back. And credit to Nick Krall. Nick Krall defended him saying, I had shoulder surgery 6 weeks ago. I have a clean bill of health, but it still bothers me. Like there's still rehab to do. There's still things to do. So like you can't blame a guy for not feeling right, even if medically it says he's good to go.
Well, and again, Hunter Greene had tried to come back after only missing like 2 starts.
Hmm.
and it didn't work. 2 starts in, he tweaked it again. So I was just it just amazes me, and even here we are late November now, and we're still talking about something that Mark Sheldon wrote back in October, and I guess it gives us something to talk about. But at the same time he wrote that, not every beat writer, which there aren't as many anymore, not every beat writer was writing anything about this. So it's just amazing to me. Um, and let's just be honest too. There's been, for various reasons, there's fewer companies slash newspapers slash websites that cover the Reds on a daily basis than there used to be. That's just the way it is. So there's not that healthy competition there as far as finding your own sources and that kind of thing. But also behind the scenes, there's been some kind of like, if the Castellinis don't like what you wrote, you might not get a credential type feeling. And I
Mm.
don't know if it's that drastic, but access isn't what it used to be. And it really feels like a deal where they're kind of wanting to control the narrative as much as they can. And so to me, like if you said something bad about the Reds and they want to revoke some access you have, when a guy like Sheldon writes something bad about one of the Reds players, which saying, "Hey, you want to be a leader, you should get out there," like that's bad. That's not being flowery in your praise of the team you're covering, which is not their job. First of all, I'm not saying that, but I just feel like there is a side where it is like this organization for 10 to 15 years has tried to cultivate. We don't want people who say bad things about us around. That's whispered about throughout media around Cincinnati and Ohio. Like on that side, you've got that, and then on the other side, you've got this guy that's saying these things. I'm just amazed. I'm sorry. It just I didn't even mean to go this far with it, but when
No,
that
I
happens,
agree.
if this
I agree.
happened in New
It's
York, where guys were always trying to find, there's such competition in New York or Philadelphia, bigger market, all that. If somebody started using a source to say the Reds should trade Hunter Greene or might trade Hunter Greene, that wouldn't be that surprising there. But to me, it's very surprising here because it's just so contrasting. And again, I go back to somebody, it's not just a trainer. It can't be Skylar. Like somebody high up in the Reds organization is feeding this information. If that's the way it is, or Hunter Greene did something terrible to Mark Sheldon. I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, that's where we are with that. So okay, you've got a jet here very quickly. I understand that. Let's go ahead and start the viewer mail segment, and maybe you can say goodbye if you have to get out. All right, we're just gonna keep doing the show with or without you, Skylar. I'm sorry that we couldn't find a different time, but family and other things got in the way of my schedule as well. So here we are. Okay, viewer mail, actual letters from actual viewers. We start out with our good friend Kyle Kapler, and he says, most likely to be tendered. Gotta be Will Benson, right? Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's got to be Will Benson. I mean, he didn't have enough on field. I don't know if he had enough on field production to justify anybody wanting to trade for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think he's going to be on that non-tendered uh, list. I'm struggling to think of anybody else that the Reds could afford to non-tender, um, and just the weird dynamic between him and Tito.
Yes,
It
that's
it's
part of
so noisy without actually
it. Uh-huh.
saying nobody actually saying anything.
You don't play for like 5 weeks straight, but you're on the roster. I mean, come on.
Right.
And then he actually kind of helped save the season because he had a bit of an outburst offensively at the
Yeah.
end. I think it's got to be him. I mean, I couldn't justify paying him the extra money that he's going to get based on service time and all that sort of thing when you look at his numbers. And I guess in one way, I'm glad if I'm not glad to see Will Benson go. Like he's exciting sometimes, and I think he's a good guy, right? I'm not, so from that standpoint, I'm not glad it's going to be Will Benson, but I'm glad it's not going to be Gavin Lux because
Mm.
Branch Brown and I talked about last week, and even though Gavin Lux will get a raise here, I just they've never employed, even when they had their best team back in 2012, they've never employed a quote unquote backup slash utility slash not quite an everyday player, but could play 4 days a week guy with this kind of value. this kind of ability. All right. They've always gone cheap, and this is not that. So I actually going to be pleasantly surprised if they don't non-tender Gavin Lux and they keep a guy like that around who's not necessarily an everyday player.
Yeah, I think he's a great backup, great production. Whenever somebody goes down with an injury or just needs a day off, I mean, there's tons of times last year where we saw Matt McLean wasn't getting it done at the plate, so he needs somebody else that can slot in there. I don't really love him in left field, but other than that,
Yeah.
I would say another non-tender candidate would be Santiago Espinal. I think
Well, he's technically already gone.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. He's
They
actually
did
is
the
out.
non-tendering before they did the non-tendering. So yeah, okay. Brandon Kamick says if Raisel Iglesias is going for 1 year, $16 million, how bleak does the Reds bullpen rebuild look? Well, did you expect them to sign somebody really pricey? I did not. Is it Gavin Williams or
Devin Williams.
Devin Williams. That's the only way they're going to get Devin Williams if it's a complete pillow contract and he gets 1 year and 15 or so million, and he wants to earn a bigger payday next year. So I guess if you're talking about closers, Skylar, I never expected a big name closer. Like they haven't really done that since they got Francisco Cordero. Like that's just not their move in free agency. So I wouldn't worry so much about Iglesias. I think Iglesias is more of the Braves are familiar with them. He turned his season around last year, and Iglesias is getting a little older. So I guess the only thing I'm surprised by is that it came this early, right? Because I could see later in the offseason if Iglesias got his agent is asking for 3 or 4 years, and the Braves are like, no, we're not giving you 3 or 4 years. If the average annual value on that 3 or 4 year request was going to be like $14 million a year, but then the Braves are willing to give him 16 for just one and be done with it, I think that's more than likely what happened. So I don't think the closer market is in the Reds' waters, but I also don't think it's going to inhibit, because one thing, and I'm not going to say the only thing, but one thing Nick Krall and his staff have done a good job these last couple years of is finding a couple relievers, usually not for that much money, although Scott Barlow made more than I expected him to when they signed him. But these guys, they've cobbled together these bullpen, and it's not. I mean, it's pretty typical to have to rebuild your bullpen because a guy might not be good after having 2 good years. That's the way
Right.
relievers are. So I guess your thoughts. I think they've done a relatively good job of rebuilding bullpens.
They have done a good job of rebuilding bullpens. I will say this was a massive, massive, massive overpay by the Braves for Raisel Iglesias, because I'm looking at Spotrac, who they do a really good job. They're usually pretty accurate. Edwin Diaz, one of the best closers in the game, is slated to make 18 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's his market value in free agency. So, as we know, because we had Raisel Iglesias all those years, Raisel Iglesias is nowhere close to Edwin Diaz, the closer from the Mets.
You know, I'd only push back a little bit because the biggest thing for a closer is to get the last out of the game. And without the numbers right in front of me, I once did a bit of a study, and Danny Graves, Francisco Cordero, and Aroldis Chapman were almost the same as far as save percentage.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, these 3 men are not the same, right? They,
right,
different levels of jaw-dropping ability versus. I love Danny Graves when he was here, but he wasn't that, right? So,
right.
So that if the only job is to get the last out of the game, and the Braves just want, like I said, my assumption is they were looking for 3 or 4 years, and the Braves laughed and said, "We're not giving you that, but we will give you a few more million this year for just 1 year." That's the only way I can rationalize this. That you're right, it's too high, but that means the market will probably be driven up. But the reliever market's been high the last couple of years. It's been like this, so I'm not.
Sure.
I just wasn't that surprised.
For Spotrac, they have Emilio Pagan's market value about 12 million, and Emilio was great this year. He was one of 3 guys to only have 30 saves this season. And Raisel Iglesias wasn't one of those 3 guys with 30 saves this season. So,
well,
quite a bit of an overpay.
I'm going to go against what I just said and say that it's not only about saves. Like it's not like again, if you're looking like if you're building a roster and you really had unlimited funds, you would look for the best stuff, right? So
Right.
that kind of just gets rid of my previous argument. But at the same time, I don't think even I would compare Pagan. I would say Iglesias has better stuff still than Pagan has. So I guess I see the gap there. He's more established than Pagan as a closer, too.
I would agree. And because we know Devin Williams is on the Reds target list, he's slated at 5.7. So
That's all.
that's within the
Well, that is
Reds
within the
range.
Reds. Yeah, and again, that would probably just be 1 year because that would have to be Devin Williams' agent wanting to have a good bounce back. And some of the numbers with Williams are actually pretty good. I know he struggled early and he got taken out of the closer's role, but his overall numbers aren't that bad. All right, let's hustle along. If you got to go, you got to go. Joey Gaditza, our friend up north, says, "What will become of Christian Encarnacion Strand?" I forgot about him completely, to be honest. It's easy to forget about Christian because CES basically after April was never back. And I guess my thought is, he could drift off into obscure former Red territory rather seamlessly here. Except I would have said maybe the same thing about Noel V. Marte until about late May, early June of last year. You never know.
Fair.
I mean,
I think
he's still
the
in the
difference
Reds.
between Marte, though, is that Marte made adjustments, made himself competitive, where we've never saw CES do that. I mean, we saw more Aquino tendencies in CES where, wow, this guy can really mash a fastball, and then nothing else. We saw way
Yeah.
more of that in CES than hey, let's make adjustments. Let's do something to stay competitive in the batter's box. And to be frank, we still are seeing that with CES, even in his AAA numbers.
Yeah, I think the difference there is I'm not comparing them as ability. I'm just saying we kind of wrote off Noel V. Marte. I think with
Fair, yeah.
CES is always going to be he's got light tower power, but that's it.
Yeah.
And if he could harness some of the other stuff, if he could play decent defense wherever it is, first base probably, like then maybe you've got something there. Dave Kingman, some of these other guys, Rob Deere. But he hasn't even shown that at the big league level. He's the epitome of a 4A player, like a Will Benson, probably, really.
Reese Hines.
Yeah, so at this point, that's where we are. Kyle Kapler came back in. Jim Bowden or Nick Krall? That was the question I referenced. As much as I grew to really not like Jim Bowden by the end, and he was around for a long time, okay? He built the 1994-95 Reds, and then he was still there. He got let go basically at the trade deadline in 03. So he was there for a long time. At least you knew he always wanted to do something to try to help make the Reds better. He even had a deal in place for 2 deals, in fact, one for Bartolo Colon, one for Scott Rowland in 2002. The ownership would not let him add a single dollar to the payroll, and he didn't get either of them. And I guarantee you, because the Indians got Brandon Phillips, Grady Sizemore, and Cliff Lee for Bartolo Colon. The package the Reds sent, which was actually agreed to before that deal, would not have been that good. And he pulled it off. He had it ready to go. So I would right now take Jim Bowden.
I would also take Bowden on the effort piece of it. And whenever he talked, like you knew where he stood on something versus Nick Krall's wishy-washy, keeping it close to the vest. So those are tendencies I'd like. I do like a lot of the moves that Nick Krall has been able to do, because he is absolutely handcuffed because the same thing, ownership will not let him do anything. But look, Key Brian Hayes was a great move that cost you nothing. Miguel Andujar, great move that cost you nothing. Now, granted, Miguel Andujar, a little shorter term thing there, but Spencer Steer, the Tyler Mahle thing, great move. to get Spencer Steer out of Tyler Mahle. I mean, the list goes on and on. Granted, there's some stinkers in there, like the Jesse Winker and Suarez trade, but I like the move set that Krall is able to been put together, even in his situation. But I liked the attitude and how he presented himself in front of the media of Jim Bowden.
Yeah, maybe again, as I mentioned with the Peter Gammons thing, maybe we just liked being in the news. I don't know. It felt like even when the Reds, like you think about 1997, 1998, the Reds aren't going anywhere. It doesn't feel like 99 was a complete surprise, and yet the Reds were kind of mentioned quite often. But I'd also argue, I every time Nick Krall makes a good move, I can't help but be surprised, which it's happened more than I would probably like to admit. So maybe he's better than I'm giving him credit for. But then again, if he didn't have the Jeimer Candelario money on his books still this year, we might be talking about Kyle Schwarber, which we didn't even talk about in this show. Kyle Schwarber did an interview at Middletown with Seg Dennison and some other folks present. And Bryce Spalding on Twitter said, look at this guy. He so badly wants to play for the Cincinnati Reds, and our team might not be willing to even pay him to do it. And how sad is that going to be? Again, I don't even know. Like sometimes the hometown guy coming back isn't a good thing. Kid Griffey Jr. Wasn't as good as we hoped, although he played pretty well that first year. But how sad is it going to be when Kyle Schwarber puts on like a Cubs uniform again, or does something like that? Like I think the Reds could have him, and I'm not even saying hometown discount completely. I think it might be a little cheaper than if he gets a deal somewhere else, but he literally talked last night on this interview with Seg Dennison of my wife's from here. I'm from here. Our friends are raising kids, our kids same age. When we come back home, we're always going to be here. I mean, always going to be here doesn't mean always going to be here because I'm going to play for the Reds. It means when we come home from the off season, this is where we're coming home to. And again, there could be more distractions and things like that. But just think, I mean, it just seems so open and shut easy for this organization. And if Jeimer Candelario's $15 million this year stands in the way of even a 1-year deal with Kyle Schwarber, who drop him in the Reds lineup this past year, and it makes instant difference. Branch Brown said you might have 93 wins this past year if you had him.
He's got a point. How many one-run games did the Reds lose?
Yeah. So it seems so open and shut to me. I'm still holding out hope. But Dwight Kelly answered Kyle Kapler's question with, I'm almost pining for the Dick Williams era. And I guess I might go there a little bit because, again, the big thing, remember going into 2020, they made actual moves, right? But the thing that started all that was the Homer Bailey trade. And that brought some exciting pieces to Cincinnati that we hadn't had for a few years. 2017 and 2018 we were out in the wilderness, man. And all of a sudden you bring in a Puig. You bring in these guys, even for just, rentals status, it made the Reds more exciting in 2019. That kind of, that era right there kind of started the shoot toward 2020 and what might have been had there been a full season. And we've talked many times about that. I guess your thoughts on Schwarber. What do you think is going to happen?
I unfortunately think the Reds aren't going to pony up and do it, where it seems like that would be the only hurdle is the money part of it. And Sean Casey was on MLB Network talking about it, where like, God, this just makes so much sense for the Reds, for him, for everything makes sense other than you have cheap owners that aren't going to pay it. That's the only thing.
This team has been bereft of leadership. I've told you before, Schwarber, as well as he's played, Schwarber is a natural leader. Yes. You're getting so much more than just a DH / left fielder. You're getting so much more. And it just doesn't seem like
I agree. And that's what we've talked about on Late Night Reds ad nauseum. Like, that's what this team needs. This is absolutely what this team has been devoided of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thanks so much to everybody who chimed in on viewer mail. Thank you, Skylar, for taking the time today. We got through it. I know you're probably got to go, so thanks so much.
Yep,
Late night Reds
anytime.
coming. Late night Reds come up Sunday. Okay.
Yes.
Let's let the people know here with Thanksgiving on Thursday next week, unless there's major Reds news, which, by the way, a year ago this weekend, the Reds traded Jonathan India for Brady Singer. So it's hard to believe
That
it's the
trade was great.
timeline. So that worked out well. So the Reds might be moving on some things here. We've seen a few signings, we've seen a few trades. So if there's news next week, I will host a show. But if we're kind of still asleep from the tryptophan, and the Reds are too, then don't plan on a show around Thanksgiving. But then we will have late night Reds. So thanks again, Skylar.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for helping us out here at the Riverfront. Continue to do so. Tell your friends and have a great weekend.